Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar on the UCAT tips for medical and dental applications presented to you by Dention. So what the plan of today is, we're just going to be looking through some UCAT tips, roughly about 8, and then by the end of the video of the webinar, hoping to show you some UCAT questions and just talk you through some UCAT questions. So my name is Arij. I'm the founder of Dention, and as you can tell by the tagline, we're going to try to show you some unique strategies for success, because I know there's a lot out there on the website and on YouTube for UCAT, but we're going to try to look at it from a different perspective. And yeah, let's begin. Okay. So just before we begin, I want to just talk a bit about Dention's mission statement. So what we're trying to do with Dention at the moment is we're trying to make effectively dentistry and medicine careers accessible for everyone. We understand that it's quite difficult to get into these courses and that sometimes there's not a lot of support available. And especially if you're doing a gap year, it may be that there's not a lot of support because you're out of education. But even if you're in year 13 or year 12, which many of you will be, you also have A-levels to think about. So it means that there's a lot of pressure going into those last 2 years of your formal education. So we're just trying to be out here to help. And obviously this webinar will be uploaded onto YouTube. And I just want to mention that anything we upload onto YouTube will be provided for free. So throughout the academic year and beyond, hopefully, we'll be providing lots of free resources just so that we can give you that edge needed to get into your chosen places at university. But I think it's also important to touch on the fact that at Dention here, we're trying to create a team culture that we're proud to belong to and represent. We really want to create that, the idea of family, and foster a sense of success so that we can all share our successes and all continuously move on forward. And finally, obviously, these mission statements will change as we progress throughout the years. But I think the last main mission statement we've got at the moment is to be at the forefront of the industry. We understand that there are a lot of different companies out there and a lot of people out there that can provide these sorts of help and advice. But at Dention, as mentioned, we're trying to provide a different perspective on everything. And it's not only a company that's here just to get you into medical and dental school, but we're almost here for you to be beyond. So whilst you're in the undergraduate years, we're looking to provide mentoring and help you ace those university years, because once you're in, it's just about making sure that you get through and you can graduate as a doctor and a dentist. Okay, so we're going to begin now. We're going to talk a bit about the UCAT. So you can see there's a couple of headings here. I think the first thing I really want to stress is the importance of the UCAT. And the reason I say this is, for example, I've had friends or people I know that when it comes to year 12 summer, they say, oh, the UCAT's nothing, we'll get around to it in the last couple of weeks. But to their demise, let's say, they often realize that when they're actually sitting the exam for the UCAT, or when they get the result, they realize that how important the UCAT is. It's almost like that first hurdle. And it's very important that if you get a good score, it sets you up fantastically for the rest of the application. So it's almost about working through everything in a step-by-step process. But UCAT is the first hurdle, let's say. So I just also want to talk a bit about booking the test. What you can do is, if you're watching this on YouTube, in the description below, there will be a link to where you can find the official UCAT website. And on there will be a bit more information on how to book the UCAT, and you can take it from there. But effectively, it's just through a peer review centre, and you just book online and you basically just go sit the test. If you're doing your driving theory, I know some of you may be in year 12, you can also, it's in the same centres. So it may be that where you've done your driving theory test, you'll also be sitting your UCAT. The next thing I want to touch on a bit about is the timings and the questions. The reason I mention this is, I mean, I will come on to it later on, but what's effectively happened is that from 2025 entry, they removed the abstract reasoning. So if you're listening to this on YouTube, or you're following along with the webinar, you may have had some brothers, sisters, siblings, or even some friends that have sat the UCAT in the past, and they're still telling you that you need to do the AR. The AR no longer exists. It's been removed for 2025 entry. So now all you're left with is 4 sections. And these 4 sections are verbal reasoning, which is effectively reading an essay. You have decision making, which is almost thinking logically and answering questions with your logical side of your brain. Then you have something called quantitative reasoning, which is just maths really. And then finally, you have something called SJT, or situational judgment test. Effectively, you're given, for this one, you're given scenarios and you're asked to rank them in appropriateness of whatever the character in the stem of the question did after receiving information. So in the verbal reasoning, you have 44 questions and you have 22 minutes to do them. In the decision making, you have 35 questions and you have 37 minutes to do that. In the quantitative reasoning, which is the maths, you have 36 questions and you have 26 minutes to do that. And for the SJT, there are a lot of questions. There's 69 questions, but you have 26 minutes to do it. And it's often the case where you'll have one stem, and then off that one stem, you'll have 4 questions. So effectively, there's not actually 69 questions, but you get my gist, don't you? And one more thing I want to mention is that as of recording, all this information is correct for 2026 entry. So if you're watching this on YouTube a couple of years down the line, it may have changed, as it did change for 2025 entry where we removed abstract reasoning. And just one last thing I want to touch on this slide is when you're booking your UCAT test, you need some sort of photographic ID. So this can be your passport or it can be your driving license, whether that's provisional or full. Well, like I said, you can find more of this information on the UCAT website, which on the YouTube channel, or rather on this video, it will be linked down below. So we're going to move on to the tips now. We're going to have eight to 9 tips. And then, as I mentioned at the start, we're going to be talking about some UCAT questions. I'm just going to run you through some questions and just give you my idea of how to answer them. So the first tip, they're in by no means are these in any order in terms of, I think tip 1's the most important. It's not like that. It's just whatever came to my mind whilst I was doing this PowerPoint. Okay, so the first tip is skim read the verbal reasoning passage. You may have heard people say, oh, you should be reading the full passage or you should not read it at all. From personal experience, I sat the UCAT twice, and whilst I was doing this PowerPoint, I asked some of my friends who are now successfully in medical or dental school, who've also sat the UCAT, and they said that they found when they were in the UCAT doing the verbal reasoning, the best thing to actually do was skim read it. So I guess you're gonna have to do a bit of practice on this. You're going to have to see what works well for you. Everybody has their own ways of working. It may be that you find that you are actually better off actually reading the whole passage before coming on to the questions, or you may be one of those people that say, actually, I don't need to read the passage and I can just answer the questions and work through the passage at the same time. But the majority of people said you want to be skim reading. And the other 2 things I want to mention on is when you're actually working through the verbal reasoning, what I've noticed is that the questions that are asked from that passage are often presented in chronological order. So what I mean by that is, say you have a passage, the first question may be, the answer may be in the first couple of lines or the first paragraph. Then the second question you have from that passage may be in the middle of the passage. And then the last or the 2 last questions that you'll have may be near the end of the passage or in the last couple of lines. And the last thing, obviously, you can see here, it says, look for keywords from the question in the passage. So what I mean by this is what you almost want to try to do is dissect the question. So the question may say, what year was X founded, or what year was Y founded, for example. So what you're looking for is the year. So in the passage then, it will say year. So this is where the skim reading comes in. Try to look for the keywords in the passage, and hopefully that will save you a lot of time. Okay, the second tip, we're going to move a bit on to decision making now. And what I found with decision making is that you normally have 4 answers to select from. And it's normally a 50-50 between which one is correct. It's like multiple choice, isn't it? So you'll have 2 answers that are normally really far away. They're not the correct ones. And then you'll have 2 answers which are almost a 50-50. They're very close to each other. And it's just about working which one is correct. So what you can do is when you have a decision-making question, if you have a look at the answers and you find straight away that some answers seem absolutely ludicrous or they don't seem very correct, get rid of them completely. And then you can whittle it down that way. So you know when you come to select your answer, which one you're looking to select really. And I guess going into decision making, you need to have a bit of that logical mindset that the questions are very logical. They're not, with decision making, they don't ask for any prior knowledge. So if it's not explicitly stated, and I mean, we'll come on to this with some of the questions later on, but if it's not explicitly stated in the question, assume that it's not true. Obviously, you'll pick this up with doing questions through your practice. Okay. Right, we're going to move on to some quantitative reasoning now. And the third tip I've got for you guys is to become familiar with mathematical formula for quantitative reasoning. You must be thinking, Irish, what are you on about? Basically, what I mean by this is with the maths or with the quantitative reasoning, when I was doing the UCAT a couple of years ago, what I noticed was that there are those types of questions that you need to know basic formulas for. So for example, I remember in my UCAT, there was a question about how far does a car travel distance with a certain amount of time. So obviously for that, you need to know your speed equals distance over time formula. And you may be asked to rearrange this in the question, depending on what they're asking you to find in the variable. But I think the main tip I'd give you for this is number one, learn your formulas. I'm not asking you to go away and learn absolutely everything, but there will be those key formulas that you need to know. For example, this one is like a GCSE physics formula. So I guess the majority of you will know that speed equals distance over time. But I'm sure that you can find somewhere online the key formulas that are needed for the UCAT. But equally then what you want to be able to do is rearrange those formulas. And the way I say to be able to rearrange it easiest is you have something called like a triangle method. So you have the speed, distance, and time. Whichever variable you're working out, you just cover it up. So say you're working out distance. I know I've not drawn it out or anything, but you can just do the speed and the times and you times it together to get the answer. So it's just being able to use a bit of maths for it. But yeah, I think that's probably the best tip I can give you for the maths in terms of being able to know those formulas and being able to rearrange them, because it will save you a lot of time in the maths. If you know the key formulas, it will help you get the answer. The fourth tip I've got for you is to work on your SJT and more importantly, understand the ethical guidelines behind it. You may be thinking that, where can I get these ethical guidelines? I think the best place to find these is through the GMC, which, so if you're applying for medicine, that is the General Medical Council. You can find, if I remember correctly, you can find a document which is called like GDC standards and the GMC guidelines. So GMC for medicine, obviously, and GDC is for all you dentists out there. So when I was doing my UCAT, I used both, even though I'm currently studying dentistry. I think you shouldn't be now reminded to say, oh, I'm doing the UCAT, I'm going to apply for dentistry, for example. You should still consider looking at the GMC guidelines, because what you'll notice, and again, we'll come on to this in some of the questions, is that you will have cases where you can have both medicine and dentistry questions. So you do require a good understanding of both of the guidelines. So you can just type it in Google, type in GDC standards or GMC guidelines. It is quite a long document, but I think you just give it a good skim read, take in the key points, and hopefully this will help you inform your answers when you're coming on to the SJT. And yeah, these are what the answers are formed by. So the way it works is that, again, letting you into a bit of a secret here, the way it works is that these UCAT questions that are formed, they're formed from a question bank. But what happens is, especially for the SJT, they have a panel of doctors and more doctors, but doctors and dentists sit down and they then provide their ideal response. Obviously, these doctors and dentists are now qualified and they basically live and breathe by these standards. So effectively, if you give these standards a read or the guidelines a read, you are going to be, and you put them in your mind more importantly, you're going to be answering in the way that the doctors and the dentists would answer. Okay, moving on to tip 5, is focus on common questions. So what I mean by this, and I think I did touch on this very briefly in tip 4 with the SJT, and I'll just expand on it a bit more. So the way the UCAT is done is that there's a huge question bank for the year. So I'm not exactly sure of the total number, but they have, I mean, they could have thousands of questions. And every time you go into your Pearson VUE test centre to sit the UCAT, you will get a random allocation of those questions. So even though you may be with somebody else who's doing the UCAT at the same time, you won't necessarily have the same questions. They'll just be chosen at random from the question bank. So I guess you could say it's a bit of luck, really, depending on what type of questions you get on the day. But they are all standardized, so you all get the same level of difficulty of questions, if that makes sense. But because I did the UCAT twice, what I noticed is that certain questions are more likely to come up than others. What I mean by this, and I'll give you an example, is that for example, in quantitative reasoning, especially between both times when I sat the UCAT, what I noticed is that in both quantitative reasoning sections for both UCAT tests, I had many questions on pie charts. So my bet or my best guess would be that you can work through the online question banks and work out what questions seem to come up more often. Obviously, there's no guarantee that will come up on the day. But what we're trying to do at Dention is get you all in the idea of applying strategically and trying to maximize the application. And this is one of the ways you can do it. So if you know that certain questions are more likely to come up, then I'm not saying give them more focus, but have a better understanding of them, if that makes sense. And one more thing I would just like to say is that in the decision making, you can always assume, and again, I had this in both of my cases of the test, you can always assume that you'll have a Venn diagram question or a logical statement. For example, I remember one of them was like, all apples are fruits, but not all fruits are apples. And then it'll give you a certain amount of options, and you just need to say whether it's true or not. But we'll come on to that later on in the decision-making questions. Okay, the next tip, it's a bit vague, but or rather, should I say, it's a bit general. But I really do think, alluding right back to the start of when I started recording this webinar, is that practice makes perfect. You won't believe how many people say, oh, I finished my year 12, I'm going on holidays for a bit. That's fine, by all means, relax. But it comes back to that point of how much importance are you giving to the UCAT. Like I said, the UCAT is the first hurdle, and if you don't have that first hurdle succeeded, effectively you're rendering your application useless. So it's all about getting that practice in and making sure that you're ready as much as you can for test day. I mean, it can go without saying, I've heard stories where people don't even sit a full mock and they turn up to the UCAT the day and they haven't done a full mock. And then you just say to them, what do you expect? So I wouldn't say go all out, obviously. You want a break over year 12 summer, or even if you're taking a gap year after your A-levels and you're reapplying to apply for dentistry again or medicine again. Just make sure that you have a regular pattern, whatever it is. And remember that small, consistent actions are much better than doing one big effort and then stopping for a week. Because whatever you've done in that one big day, you're going to forget over the week. So it's all about that active recall and coming back to things. I put in as a general thing, aim to do one mock test a day, but honestly, it depends at what stage you're at. But from my personal experience, I was doing about 2 mock tests a day. So if you really want to do it, you can do it. But what I would say is don't be bounded by the idea of just doing mock tests. For example, if you're struggling on one of the sections more than another, for example, when I did the UCAT, I had the abstract reasoning in there, and I was terrible with the abstract reasoning just because I can't see 3D or sometimes see the shape. So what I did some days is rather than doing 2 mock tests, I did 1 mock test and then I focused a bit on the abstract reasoning. So it just requires that honesty from you and a bit of that active planning, just so that you know what you need to work on, and just be honest with yourself more importantly, because you should have that time over summer, as long as you're honest and you know when your test date is, and you should be able to work through it, hopefully. The next tip is a bit like tip 6. It's just that your environment matters. You want to do it at home, the UCAT. You want to practice at home, and you want to treat it like it's a real thing at home. It really does matter, your environment. For example, in the UCAT, you'll have a PC, you'll have headphones or earplugs, and you'll have a full-size keyboard, and you'll have a whiteboard and a pen. So you won't have a physical calculator, or you won't have pen and paper to write it out. So as silly as this sounds, what I'd recommend for anyone sitting the UCAT this year or beyond is to make sure that you're trying to mimic this environment. So try to have that full-size keyboard, try not to use a scientific calculator. I know it's very tempting. and just try to use a whiteboard and a pen, because you won't have a pen and a paper in the exam. I mean, I could go on about this, but it effectively boils down to something called context-dependent memory. And for all my psychology folks out there, you'll basically know what I'm on about. Just set up the space that you're doing the UCAT in the same as you would do when you're doing the test, because it just helps. And it's like there's studies on it in psychology, but I won't get into it that much. Okay, tip 8, work on your mental math skills. I think the reason I say this is because maths can be learned. I know people say that, oh, the UCAT is an innate ability, but at Dention here, we're trying to help you maximize your application. And one of the key aspects, I think, that you can maximize your application in for the UCAT is working on your quantitative reasoning. The way you can do this, obviously, there's lots of different ways you can do this. You can, for example, as I said, you can dedicate some time each week to practicing your mental math skills without a calculator. So you could do percentages, you could do ratios, you could do fractions, you could do pie charts, for example. All these things are relevant to the quantitative reasoning. Or you could even do something like converting units from meters to kilometers, stuff like this, because it all comes up. But the maths can be learned. And I know it's a very unpopular opinion that the UCAT is an innate ability. But from what I've seen is that it's basically what you put into it is what you'll get out of it. The more you practice, the better you will do. And I think this is the biggest section that you can increase your score on if you're struggling. So it's just that element of keeping on practicing. Okay, we're on to our last tip. So tip 9 is, I just thought I'd add in some general keyboard shortcuts for you all. These are some tips that I've scoured the web for, and they're not all of them, there are more online, but these seem to be the ones that were most helpful to me in my exam, and the ones that I feel like were saving the most time. I guess you can also practice online, getting familiar with the UCAT format, which I highly recommend. But I'm not going to read all these out, but these are some of the tips and some of the shortcuts that you can use on your keyboard to make sure that you're a wizard when you're doing your UCAT. If you're on YouTube, feel free to take a pause and have a look at this. But if not, I'm now going to move on to some UCAT practice as promised. Okay, so as a bonus, as promised, let's do some UCAT questions. So what the plan is we're going to be doing a couple of verbal reasonings. We're going to be doing a couple of decision makings, a bit of quantitative reasoning, and then we're going to finish it up with some SJT, situation judgment tests. So what I'm going to do is, if you're on the webinar, I will stay quiet for a couple of minutes, but if you're on YouTube, what I would like you to do is give this text a read. Obviously, there's the answer here on your screen, but sorry, the question here on your screen. But what I want you to do is give this a read. And just as a disclaimer, all these questions were taken from the official UCAT bank. So like I said, I'll drop in the YouTube video, I'll drop the UCAT website link below. So if you want to do some more practice, you can find some of these questions from there. So on YouTube, give it a pause, give the passage a read, and then we'll answer the questions. So pause now. Okay, right, so we're going to work through the answer with the question here. Hopefully you've all given it a read. So obviously for the verbal reasoning here, we have 4 different options to select from. So if we're going to be using the tips that I said, I think the best thing you can do is give it a skim read and move on to the question straight away. So you have an idea, it's about truffles. And we're talking about a bit about the history of truffles, and it's talking about how much is exported and stuff. So that's basically the overview of the passage. So the correct answer here is actually C, because in paragraph 2, it says that Trull, so I'll just show you with my mouse, it says that, where is it? So it says that Trull is the world's biggest producer of tuber melansporum, the prince of black truffles. And it says last year the region exported more than 26,000 kilograms of them. So we know that Trull is high production of black truffles. It produces a lot of them, doesn't it? If we're looking at the other options, the reason it's not A is, so the option for A was that Trull is known for the notable quality of its soils. But if we have a look in paragraph 3, it says that the Trull's meager soil is unfit for most crops. So this basically means that it's not a good notable quality of soil. That's why A is incorrect. Obviously, B was correct. Obviously, C was correct. So moving on to B. So the option for B was that Trull is known for the increasing consumption of truffles. If we have a look, we can see here that it says that there were 26,000 kilograms of them exported, but it doesn't say whether this was an increase in export or if this was if it was an increase in export or not. So we don't really know whether this is true in terms of the consumption. Obviously, C was correct. Moving on to D, it says that Trull is known for the premium price of its truffles. So this one actually did catch me out. If we have a look here in the last, if we have a look in the, where's it gone? Sorry. Yeah, so if we have a look in the third paragraph, sorry, it says here that it sells for 700 euros per kilogram. But this is what I was referring to before, is that you're not sure. If it doesn't say explicitly, don't assume. So it doesn't say that it's known for its premium price. For all we know, there could be something that sells for 1,000 euros, which is obviously more premium. So that's why the correct answer here was C. Okay, so we're still on the same passage, just moving on to the second question. So again, have a look at the question and then we'll work through the answers. Okay, hopefully you've had a look through the questions. So we're going to take it through methodically. So each of the following statements can be supported by the information in the passage except. So let's deal with B first. It says truffle cultivation is labor intensive. Well, we don't know this, do we? Because it says here that, so in the first line it says, a child Manolo Donate often saw strange men with dogs in the mountains near his house in Sarian, a town in the Trull province of Aragon in Spain. So we can't assume, so it is supported that it's labor intensive because you're going out with dogs in mountains, okay? Moving on to C. So C is supported as well because it says that Aragon is a mountainous region. So again, if we look back in the first and second line, we can see that it says the mountains near his house in Sarian. So Aragon is a mountainous region. However, if we look at D, this is not supported by the information. So we select this answer because if we have a look in the very last paragraph here, it says that the Spaniards rarely eat truffles. So this means that although the Spaniards, we don't know about the locals, do we? So this one is not supported. Okay, so that was a bit of VR practice. I know it's very brief, but we're going to be moving on to some decision-making practice now. Okay, so same thing as before. Give it a read, have a look. If you're on the webinar, I'll stay quiet for a couple of minutes, but if you're on YouTube, just pause the video because I will be moving on in the next couple of seconds for you. Okay, hopefully you've given that a read. So these are the answers I got for this question, and I just want to explain my thinking behind it, if that's okay. So in a mixed gender school, all students must study at least 2 foreign languages out of French, German, or Spanish. No boy studies all 3 foreign languages. So what it's asking us to do is place yes if the conclusion does follow, and place no if the conclusion does not follow. So this is a very standard decision-making question that you can expect in the UCAT. So let's deal with the first statement given. It says that no girl studies only French. So the reason I've gone for yes for this is because if you have a look, right at the start, it says all students must study at least 2 foreign languages. So you can't have a case where, whether it's a girl or a boy, that they just study 1 language only. So that's why that is true. So we put yes for that. Moving on to the second box, the statement given is that all of the boys study 2 foreign languages. So the reason I've gone for yes for this is because the school is mixed gender and it says that all students must study at least 2 foreign languages. So effectively that means that the boys do study 2 languages. Moving on to the third statement, we have more girls than boys study foreign languages. This one is dead easy. I mean, even in the stem of the question, we've not been given any information with regards to the numbers or the ratio between the girls and the boys. So for this one, it's just no. And then moving on to the fourth statement, we have that more girls than boys study 3 foreign languages. So for this one, we know that no boys study 3 languages, but we don't know about the number of girls, do we? So if we know the boys, but we don't know the girls, and that means that we can't like quantitatively compare the numbers. So for this one, that's why I have gone no as well. And then the very last statement given is at least one boy and at least one girl study the same pair of foreign languages. Again, this is what I was talking about at the very start of the webinar or in the decision-making section, is that decision-making is very logical. And the reason I've gone for no for this is you can infer, but it's not explicitly stated in the question, is it? So that's why for this, you've just got to put no, because we don't have any information for it. So I guess a top tip, again, for the decision-making is only to use the information given in the STEM. Don't use any prior knowledge and don't try to infer any information. Just use what's given. Okay, right. So for this one, we're going to do another decision-making. If you're on the webinar, I'll give you a couple of minutes or a minute or so to look through. Jot down your answers, or if you're on YouTube, I would just like you to pause, have a go at the question, and come back in a couple of seconds. Okay, right, so I'm going to move on to my explanation for this. This is another type, it's a similar type of decision-making question to the one we did before, but for this one, you can see here, forgive my very messy handwriting, I've drawn out like a little bit of a flow diagram, if that makes sense. And this is one of the tips I'd give you in the decision making, is because the information is so novel sometimes and it's so far-fetched words like quarks or tings or maze, because I did not know what these are before looking at this question, is that I would just say write out any information and try to join any dots that you can, if that makes sense. So what I've done here effectively is we know we're talking about quarks because that's the first bit given in the STEM. So we know that quarks can have either feathers or furs. So I've gone feathers, furs, split it up into 2 branches. And then off that, I followed this second line and the end of this first line where I split it up into brown feathers and black fur, which are most of the things. And then brown feathers can either be all of the maize, so all maize have brown feathers, or some of the things have brown feathers. So honestly, I think doing it this way will help you during the UCAT, because you don't want to be going through for each bit and reading this STEM again. Whereas if you have something like a flow diagram, even if it's not neat like mine, you should just, it'll help you logically see it. So that's just something that I jotted down in a couple of seconds. And honestly, it helped for this question. Right, so I'm going to go through enough waffling. I'm going to go through the actual answers and why I've put the certain answers for each statement. Okay, so dealing with the first statement, it says all black things have fur. So if you have a look, it says that most things have black fur and those which are not black have brown feathers. So therefore, we can assume that all black things have fur. Again, if you look at this, you can follow it along, that black fur with things. That is the way to do it. Okay. And then for the second statement, it says any brown quark must be a male. So if you have a look, again, look at the flow diagram that I've made here. You can see that some brown quarks are things. So for that one, that's why I've gone no for it, because it's not true. And then moving on to statement C, we're given that some maize with fur are coloured black. So again, in the question, there's no mention of a mare in the fur section. So if you have a look here in the fur, you can see here I've not got a mention at all of maize. So therefore, we can't assume that it's correct or not. So we just put no, we're not inferring anything. Moving on to the next one, we can see that statement given is none of the black quarks have feathers. So for this one, I've gone yes. And the reason I've gone yes is that all maize are brown and any of the things which have feathers are also brown. So it's almost like a double negative here, that none of the black quarks have feathers. So that's why I've gone yes for this. And then the very last one, it says more quarks have feathers than furs. Again, you're not inferring in decision making. And more importantly, we haven't been given any numbers. So for this, you just have to go no, because no numbers are given. Okay, right. Moving on to some quantitative reasoning now. So again, if you're on the webinar, have a look. I'll give you about 35 seconds. If you're on the YouTube, pause, try to work out your answer and come back and then I'll go through it. Okay, so we're going to go through the answer now. I'm going to tell the answer straight, first of all. So the answer I got for this was actually C, which was 55,225. And the way you work this out, because all it's asking you to do is calculate the number of people who voted in the constituency in 2016. So we're looking at this column here. Obviously, this is 2020 and this is 2016. So all you're doing is you're going to be adding up all the numbers of voters for each party. So you have purple party, you have blue party, you have green party, you have yellow party, and you have orange party. So what you're doing for this is you're just going to be adding up the numbers. It's quite simple, really. All you're doing is adding up 23,033, 501, 7,753, 2,200, 22,798, 1,140, and that gives you a total of 55,225. So I feel like that one was quite straightforward. And these are the questions in the quantitative reasoning that can save you a lot of time. You're very fast on the keyboard with the calculator. Okay, we'll move on to the next one now. So I'm sorry if it's a bit small, if you're struggling to see it, but give it a read. Again, if you're on the webinar, I'll give you 35 seconds. If you're on YouTube, just pause it, jot down your answer, and then we'll go through it after you finish on pausing the video. Okay, so I'm going to go through the answer. This one did catch me out a bit, but I think it's just about dissecting, because it's a graph. They always want you to do something with the graph or the bar chart given in the question. It's there for a reason. So let's have a look. So over here, we basically have podcast length on the x-axis. So this is less than 15, 15 to 30 minutes, 30 to 60 minutes, or 60 plus minutes. And over here on the y-axis, oh, shouldn't have done that. On the y-axis, we have a percentage of podcast length spent on advertisements. So what we're trying to work out is how much longer is the length of advertisement in a 28-minute podcast in a 24-minute podcast. So we know we're going to be dealing with this bar chart line here. So if we have a look, we know that whether it's between 15 or 30, it doesn't matter. We know that regardless of the time, that podcast between 15 and 30 minutes will always have a 10% percentage of time given to advertisements. So now we know that the best way to do it is work out the difference between 28 and 24 minutes, which is the two podcasts that we have. So that difference is 4 minutes. And now what we can do is work out that 10% of 4 minutes, because that is the actual advertisement time. Obviously, 10% of 4 minutes is 0.4 minutes. If you look at the answer, it wants it in seconds. So to go from minutes to seconds, obviously we times by 60. You do 0.4 times 60, and that gives you an answer of 24 seconds. Okay, so that's the QR done. Again, we only went through 2 to 3 questions, but we're going to move on to the SJT now. Okay, so we're going to start off with a dental related scenario. Sorry, I'm a bit biased, but we'll also move on to some of the medicine related scenarios later on. So I'm not going to read all this out. I'm sure you can read it out. If you're on the webinar, I'll give you 15, 20 seconds, give it a read, and then 10, 15 seconds to answer. But if you're on the YouTube, give it a quick read, jot down your answer, and we will come back to it. Okay, so I'm going to go through the answer now. What I'm going to do for the SJT is I'm just going to give you the reason why I've selected a certain answer and explain my reasoning behind it, if that makes sense. So for this one, I went for B, which is important. And the reason it's important is because both Mr. Warder and Serena are responsible for ensuring patient safety. We know in healthcare that patient safety is basically one of the pillars. It always comes first. So even though that Serena has not been trained on the tool, it is still a responsibility to discuss her expertise and limitations with the clinical supervisor. So she needs to go to the clinical supervisor and say that, look, I'm actually not competent on this machine, so I don't think I can carry out this procedure. And then obviously they can speak with the clinical supervisors, and they should be able to come up with a joint action plan to develop a competency with the tool, whether that be to get trained upon it or to maybe delegate it to someone else. or maybe even watching a few more procedures on the tool before conducting the actual treatment with the tool. So that's why I've gone for important for this one. Okay, moving on to the next one, still the same stem, or rather the passage, but this time we're asked that she has never conducted the procedure using the new tool before. So again, I'll give you 10-15 seconds because obviously you read the stem. On YouTube, saying 10-15 seconds, just pause it and then we'll come back to you. Okay, so I'm going to go through the answer. The reason, so for this one, I have gone for A, which is very important. And the reason I've gone for this is effectively, if you're not comfortable to use a certain tool to a patient, just don't do it. You're putting, more importantly, you're putting yourself at risk. You're opening yourself up to like issues with your fitness to practice, but more importantly, you're not working within your limits, are you? And across both medicine and dentistry, in the standards and the guidelines, one of the main pillars, and not the pillars, but let's say one of the main rulings we have is to work effectively within your limits and know your limits. So it's also about patient safety, but it's also about understanding what are your limitations in working and at what level can you work to a patient, if that makes sense. So that's why this one is very important, because both Mr. Ward and Serena are responsible for ensuring patient safety. Serena here should communicate a lack of experience honestly to ensure that Mr. Ward is actually available for limitations. And maybe this can lead to a way where Mr. Ward is help Serena later down the line to develop these skills. But it's also the dentist's responsibility as a qualified clinician, as a clinical supervisor, to ensure that the students are working within their responsibility and their ability, if that makes sense. Because ultimately it comes down to patient safety and well-being, just to make sure that the patient is getting the best possible treatment at the end of the day. Okay, we're going to move on to some medical SAT now. So give it a read. I'm not going to read out the stem. If you're on the webinar again, I'll give you a couple of seconds. And if you're on YouTube, just pause and then you can jot down your answer and come back. Okay, so I hope you've all given it a read. And the thing we're trying to work out is that whether Kim will be in trouble if he reports her. I want to caveat this question. I know still the majority of med schools and some of the dent schools still do dissections, or whether it's prosection or dissection, but you will be seeing cadavers in your medical and dental course. So it's important that you understand when you're going into these courses that you will be seeing these type of things, and that you have a very good understanding about what you need to be doing when you're going into these dissection rooms, or whether you're going into these anatomy rooms, about the things that you can do and you can't do. Because thankfully these people, by their kindness, have donated their bodies for us medical and dental students to be able to learn from them. So it's just about having that element of respect and being able to know what you can do and you can't do. So the reason for this, the answer I went for this is not important at all. And the reason I've gone for not important is that effectively Kim is accessing a prohibited area using the medical student IDs badge. And more importantly, they're taking photos of a dead body without permission or consent is a security breach, because the donors only asked to give their bodies to be used for research, not for things like this. So it's just also just being a good human, respecting the privacy and dignity. And yeah, it's just about being a good human effectively. But you should also be aware that there are strict procedures in place for these at university, and that all medical students, all medical professionals, all dental professionals, all dental students, anybody working with medics and dentists, they must follow the law guidance on professional standards and other regulations. So it's also important to note that if there is a breach, you have a duty to report it. So for whether or not Kim gets involved, Rinny must report her in this case. Okay, so have a look at the same stem, have a look. This time I'll give you 20 seconds maybe on YouTube, just pause, jot down your answer, and then we'll go through it. Okay, this time it's asking whether Kim knows that she is not permitted in the room or to take photos. So the reason I've gone for D, which is not important at all, is because whether or not Kim knows that she's permitted in the room or not is not important at all, because Kim has accessed, more importantly, an unauthorized area by deception. She's using another student's ID badge. She's pretending to be someone else. It's a breach of security, effectively. She's pretending to be someone else. But more importantly, she's in an area that she's not, because she's not a medical student, is she? So she shouldn't be in such a place. But more importantly, taking photos of the bodies without permission, again, it's the privacy and dignity of those people that have volunteered so kindly to let medical and dental students use the bodies for education. It's been compromised. So again, it just comes down to that point where medical professionals must speak up or raise concerns to prevent such inappropriate behaviours continuing and contributing to a negative, unsafe environment. So, yeah. So for that one, I've gone for not important at all. Okay, that is basically the most of the webinar finished. I just want to touch on a few things. So that's the SJT finished. Just for all the people that are still here, thank you very much for sticking till the end. We're almost there, I promise. I just want to talk through a bit about what happens after the UCAT. So we've done all the UCAT. I've told you some tips. We've gone through some questions. Hopefully they've helped. But what I want to talk about is what happens after the UCAT, because researching online, there doesn't seem to be a lot of guidance as to what happens. So you go into your person view center, you sit your UCAT test, and once you finish, you leave the room. And as you're leaving, you're given a paper results slip after the exam. What I would say is keep hold of this results slip. Make sure not to scrumple it up or anything, because you may need it later down the line. You won't need it. You don't directly send your results to the universities. UCAT automatically does this. So whatever you get on the results day, and that UCAT score will automatically go to the universities in early November. But just make sure that you do get that paper slip result and you're free to go after that. And hopefully it's all gone well for you. But what I want to talk about, more importantly, is the gap between doing your UCAT, whether you're doing this in July, August, late August, right up to the end of the UCAT testing date, and the time you actually put in your UCAS application for medicine or dentistry. So for this year, at the time we're recording this one, 2025, so the UCAS deadline for early medicine and dentistry. So medicine dentistry is separate from the normal January UCAS application submission. You have an early UCAS deadline. So effectively, when you go into year 13, if you're going from year 12, in October, you need to have your personal statement done. You need to have done your UCAT, obviously, got your work experience done, and then you put your UCAS application in on this year. It's the October the 15th at 6 o'clock. So after that, you can still put in your fifth choice. So whether that be something else related to healthcare, like biomedicine, or pharmacy is a normal one that people go for, or even if you want to do something different. But your core 4 has to be in by 15th of October. But between that time of the UCAT and of actually putting in that UCAS deadline, you have time. So you'll obviously know what your UCAT score is. This is where the Dention website is going to come in handy. So what we're doing at the moment is, at the time we're recording this, we are currently gathering all the data for all the medical and dental schools undergraduate application. And on the website, so this will be www.dention.co.uk, and we're going to be releasing all, for each medical and dental school, we're going to be releasing like a table of each with application statistics. And with your UCAT score, you can have a look at the past, I think we've got 5 years of data. You can have a look at the past 5 years of data and see where you stand, because on that table it'll have the minimum UCAT needed for interview, and it'll have the UCAT cutoff. So say if you achieved a set score that exceeds the UCAT cutoff of that university they had the year before, you'll have a good chance of getting an interview at that university. But this is where the UCAT, the Dention website comes in, but also your own research. Have a look at what others are saying. Student Room's normally a good site, but also just general blogs, so you can get a good idea of what the UCAT cutoffs are. And that way, you can effectively apply strategically, which is one of the main things that Dention we're trying to push, is you want to apply with 4 choices that you're confident that you're going to get an interview at. And it's just about knowing what your UCAT score is, what your GCSEs are, and what your predicted A-level grades are. how they rank for the interviews, and this all will be on the Dention website. But it's just things that you need to be thinking about between your UCAS deadline. Sorry, between your doing your UCAT and your UCAS deadline. We've all been there, especially everyone on the team at Dention. We've all been there. It's not easy, but I think more importantly, we're just here to guide you through this application process. Okay, and then finally, I just want to touch ahead on looking at 2026 entry. As it says, Dention is here to help. Everything on YouTube will be free. All the webinars that we upload, any tips and tricks, I should say, will all be uploaded to YouTube for free. And we really do hope that it will be a site of use to you, whether that's the website, whether that's this YouTube channel if you're watching it on YouTube, or whether you're actually joining us for in-person events or online webinars. We really do hope it's of use to you. But we also have an Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn, where we will also be uploading short form content on there, just to give you updates of what we're doing at Dention and upcoming events. But most importantly, most of the things are going to be on the Instagram, maybe on the TikTok, and on the website and the YouTube. So you will keep checking the website. We'll be uploading the data there soon, and you can just keep up to date. And we may even bring out a mailing list later on for tips throughout the year. So say we get to interview season, we'll be giving you interview tips. We get to accepting your offer time, we'll be telling you how to accept your offer properly, because we've all been there at Dention and we know how it all works on the inside. So we just want to be there to help you. But yeah. And finally, just before I thank you all for your time, I just want to touch on some upcoming events that we have planned for 2026 entry. So at the time of recording this, we are currently in summer of 2025. So these are going to be coming in from the end of 2025, obviously applying for entry of September 2026. These are all still not confirmed, but the majority of them will be going ahead, and we may add more depending on the demand. So what we've got in September, so this is even for New Year 12s joining, but also returning Year 13s or anyone on a gap year. It will be hosted by me and a couple of other people here at Dention. We're going to be basically taking you through the application journey. So right from the start of Year 12, right through to the end of actually accepting your offer and your first day at university. It's just going to be a webinar like this one for the UCAT. It will be free to attend. And we'd also recommend you to bring your parents along, because there's some tips in there for parents as well, because we can appreciate that for parents, sometimes some children may be moving out and there's a lot of stress on them. So we're just here to help and provide them that perspective on it. And then in October, looking forward, we're not confirmed whether it's going to be in person or if it's going to be online, but we will be holding an interview crash course. So to let you into a bit of a secret, these will include some of the questions that us at Dention have personally had in our mock MMIs and final interviews for both medical and dental school. But also we're just going to be going through basically a lot of questions, and we're just going to be dissecting them, showing you how to answer them and what an ideal response looks like. So that's something to look forward to in October. Again, we'll be putting all this out on the website and on social medias if you want to book in for it, or even maybe on the mailing list. And then the last two things we've got planned currently is the Manchester MMI is going to be our annual MMIs that we'll be holding at University of Manchester. And these will be a full mock MMI experience with current medical and dental students. And we'll be giving you active, positive, constructive feedback so you know what to prepare on for your actual thing. So we'll be holding two, because I know interviews extend all the way up to the end of February or even early March sometimes. So we'll be holding one in late November, early December. Date is still to be confirmed. And then we'll be holding one in the new year New Year 2026. So obviously, depending on when you have your interviews, you can attend both, you can attend one, entirely up to you. But yeah, that's something to look forward to. And that will probably be our main event of the year. And then one thing that's not on here, but we're just recently planning, is we're going to be holding just like I've done here for the UCAT, we're going to be holding an A-level webinar tip. So when you're coming up to your A-levels, we're just going to be talking through general tips for the A-levels and just how to make sure that after you got your offers, how to make sure you follow through and confirm those conditional places at university. That's all for today. I hope the UCAT side of things was helpful to you. If you have any questions, you're on YouTube. you can drop us a comment below, or even you can reach out on Instagram and on the website. And you can find a email on the website where you can ask any inquiries and we'll get back to you. But yeah, thank you very much for your time, and hopefully we'll see more of you. And obviously we're going to keep pumping out things throughout the year. And yeah, wish you the best of luck with your application.